RX's debleed module addresses the familiar problem of excessive bleed leakage in a recording. Bleed can come from many sources. Headphone bleed is probably the most common for musicians. An acoustic guitar player recording with a metronome click in his headphones, or a vocalist overdubbing her part with a rough mix of the track in the cans. If enough care isn't taken to use suitably closed-back phones and to make sure the performer doesn't take off one ear cup, as singers are likely to do, the engineer can end up with that familiar high-pitched leakage that can at times be audible enough to cause problems. Acoustic bleed is also pretty commonplace when there are multiple players in the same room or between different drums in a multi-mic'd drum kit. That's not necessarily a problem, but if the bleed is strong enough, it could get in the way when someone wants to, say, add an effect to a snare drum, only there's too much hi-hat in the snare track and it picks up the same effect unintentionally. In post-production, an interview or discussion panel with people on separate mics might suffer some unwanted bleed, potentially enough to impact the sound, which may then require gating or editing, a problem if everybody talks over each other. Debleed is intended to address these kinds of problems. To get it to work effectively, you'll need both the track with the unwanted leakage, the active track as debleed calls it, and the bleed source, the track that contains the primary version of the bleed signal. So, for the acoustic guitar and click scenario, the bleed track would be the click track. For the vocal overdub situation, the bleed track would be a submix of the arrangement, ideally the rough mix that was in use when the vocal was cut. I've imported the two relevant tracks from a song, a vocal overdub with some strong headphone leakage, probably from the singer turning one ear cup around, leaving it open to the air and the mic.
As the winter turns to spring.
And the matching section of a mix of the song that should be pretty much what the singer was hearing in his cans during the recording.
As the winter turns to spring.
Ideally, this would be exactly what was in the cans. If the unwanted bleed was noticed at the session, it'd be easy enough to use the same rough mix that was just played for the singer. Here I'm reconstructing that rough mix after the fact, but it should be close enough to work. The bleed source track needs to be time-aligned within a few milliseconds to the active track, the one to be processed, to get the most effective bleed reduction. To ensure this, I took the two audio files, the vocal take, which was an overdub that started well into the song, and that same section of the bounced mix, the bleed source, and lined them up in the DAW first, making sure they were in sync, and then bounced that snippet of the mix and dropped the now time-aligned files into RX. Now I can open the debleed module from the module list, and we're ready to proceed. To learn the bleed profile, you have to select the bleed source file here. Debleed then needs to learn the profile of both the active track, the one with the bleed, and the bleed source. Once this is done, then you simply set the bleed reduction strength, and, if necessary, you can add additional artifact smoothing if you hear any watery artifacts.
As the winter turns to spring.
As you can hear, despite the fact that my bleed source was probably not the exact same rough mix of those parts as got picked up in the recording, debleed did a good job of eliminating the offending headphone leakage.
As the winter turns to spring. As the winter turns to spring.
The next module, Spectral Repair, lets the user take a more active role in isolating unwanted sound via graphic selection in the spectrogram display.